One of our big taglines, I'm actually wearing it on my shirt right now, is trust the process.
Yeah.
Right? It's a process thing that we really need to commit to and move forward with and put the little steps in place and be okay that it takes a while, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lifelong work, and we're always developing our ethical sense as we grow. I mean, there's some school of thought that says, it's around 40 before most of us have a fully formed conscience. And some people never actually get there. So, yeah, it's a lifelong process, and we're always growing in that way.
Man, I've got 10 years to go. All right, solid.
Lucky you, Mallory. Lucky you.
I'm 5 years past Mallory.
This episode of Inside the Process is powered by Trainual, the one app that organizes who does what and how. Check it out at trainual.com.
Well, what is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Inside the Process, where we sit down with some of the brightest minds in business to dig into all of their process secrets and best practices to help you continuously improve and level up the work you're doing. I'm Mallory, a 10-year systems and ops veteran turned marketer, and I'm here with Shawn, the super awesome training and dev guy, known around here as Mentor Shawn.
Hey, everybody. Glad to be here with you. And I am really, really excited because our guest today is Ann Skeet. She's the Senior Director of Leadership Ethics at the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics. And it's pretty simple. Ann is on a mission to make the business world a better place. And wow, I mean, she's done some amazing things in all kinds of places. So check this out. Her career's taken her from a little telephone company now known as Verizon to interviews and mentions on the likes of CEO Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, and Al Jazeera, graduating from Harvard, running high schools, and honestly, like a billion other things. You're going to get to see this. Ann has a real gift for navigating ethical dilemmas in every corner of the corporate world because she's literally been there. So cannot wait to dig into this with you, Ann. Welcome to Inside the Process.
Great. Thanks, Shawn. Thanks, Mallory. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So I've been around senior leadership teams since I was 19 years old. You have by far more experience than I do, but I've been working closely with leaders on their processes and practices for the better part of a decade. And even in my time, I have seen some things. Now, for legal reasons, I'm not going to get too specific here. But there's many times that I've heard, sometimes you've got to look the other way on things in business to get stuff done. And I've been in a rather unique position to see firsthand the absolute devastation that short-term tolerance has on the organization's long-term success and ultimately the company and its culture. And I think I'm so fortunate to now be on a team with leaders who walk the talk and can still make it all happen. But a lot of businesses out there really struggle to balance the getting stuff done with staying true to their core values, or perhaps not towing the line of ethics, even if it's unintentionally. So from your experience, what is your foundational framework for ensuring that a company has a rock solid ethics framework in place and they're built on doing the right thing?
Well, we'll probably end up talking about a couple of frameworks today, but I think the one I want to start with in response to your question is one that helps people to think about what's a healthy culture. We've had a lot of conversation in society about unhealthy culture or toxic culture. The Me Too movement really brought that to the forefront. But it's really easier for the human mind to imagine a positive frame and give it something to shoot for. So I like to put it in the context of what does a healthy culture look like? And to do that, we've constructed a model that's drawn on some research from other scholars to talk about what is organizational health, what does it look like? And there's three big buckets. Fostering empathetic relationships is the first bucket. Integrating organizational functions is the second bucket, and developing organizational introspection is the third. So let me just dive briefly, deeply into each of those to give you a sense of what that means. So fostering empathetic relationships looks like having a sense of community in the organization, because people who are more connected to one another have a deeper sense of obligation for avoiding ethical missteps. So you want people to feel like they're connected. So leaders who are doing this well are very intentional about building community. They tell stories. They bring themselves and their leadership into their work by sharing stories with the people that they work with. And they do a lot of subtle things to encourage empathy in the workplace, like rotating people through different parts of the organization, maybe the more well-established to the newer parts of the organization. They give people a chance to see their company through the eyes of customers and clients, so they have empathy for that experience. So in all these different ways, they're really encouraging empathetic relationships. In the realm of integrating organizational functions, the most critical thing is that companies develop some kind of rubric, some framework for ethical decision-making in their organization that everybody's using. And we can talk about that a little bit more, but that's the foundation of it. And then trying to integrate people across silos. So you want to have sort of a sense of collaboration among cross-divisional teams. That might be one example of what that looks like. And also making sure that you're honoring both the strategic part of the company and the executional part of the company. So think of integration as sort of left brain, right brain. That's what you're going for in the company itself. And then that last bucket of developing organizational introspection is really the easy way to remember it is the past, the present, and the future. So the past piece is honoring the company's history, bringing forward lessons that have been learned over time, stories that talk about the organizational potential that's been realized, really paying attention to what the history of the organization has been. Focused on the current day, then you want to really be taking the pulse of the company as frequently as you can be. And so that looks like some practice of regular self-assessment of the culture. Some companies do these with short kind of pulse surveys that they do. Others do more comprehensive assessments of their ethical culture. There's pros and cons to each of those, but the best practice is to be constantly taking the temperature of the company and knowing what's going on in it. And then as to the future, it's important for leaders to acknowledge the uncertainty about the future and the potential for change. Probably the best example that we saw of leaders doing this was during the COVID crisis, when so many business leaders and organizational leaders were just so honest about the fact that they really couldn't know or didn't know what was going to happen, but were doing their best to make decisions in real time. So those three as I say, those buckets, if you will, is the way I like to think about them. That helps people to identify when they see those things happening in a company, they can say, okay, this is a healthy culture. This is one that's more likely for ethical practices to take root.
We do pulse surveys here at Trainual, and I think that it's so powerful because they come out, every month, I think it is. Versus just kind of being something that happens, once a year as like an NPS score. And that's really all they care about is that score. Like this is something that they just constantly have that check on, which I think is really cool. And then you talked about job shadowing and cross-functional collaboration. And I think those things, if applied, are relatively easy to implement. But I think the one that you hit on that can be tough for people is building community within the organization. And so I'm curious if you can elaborate on maybe a couple of things that leaders can do to foster community within their teams.
Yeah, these can be really simple things. Social events outside the office that you structure for people to get together informally to just spend time together. It can be celebrating birthdays in the office. It can be starting meetings with some kind of check-in process. Some sort of informal, going around the room and letting people maybe acknowledge what's distracting them from being fully present in the meeting. And then people are more likely to share things that maybe aren't directly work related, but just anything that helps people to know each other, to know the challenges of the different work roles that they have, and to get a sense of the context that people are operating in when they come to work every day.
And what would you say for those leaders that are over remote teams?
I think those leaders have a unique challenge, but I also see that they've met that challenge. So during COVID, we do have a tradition in our office of doing some things socially. We might get together for a meal outside the office once a month. It's a no-host event. Everybody buys their own lunch, but we just go check out some local restaurant here in San Jose or the Santa Clara area and spend time together. But during COVID, the executive director of our center arranged all kinds of just fun trivia night games for us to do, or just different things where we got together and we weren't doing direct work functions, but we were getting to know each other a little bit better, like who's super competitive on the team and, wants to win that trivia night no matter what. So I do think there are ways to do that. I think that, maybe that informal check-in at the beginning of the meeting is something that's just as effective on Zoom as it is if you're, sitting in the room together. So I think a lot of things can be adapted, but I think you have to be more intentional about it when you're working remotely and maybe build in more time than might seem originally comfortable to do it. Because one way that leaders might think about it is, this is taking away from productive time, but actually it's greasing the wheels. It's making it more likely that the team is going to be productive when they are working together.
So true. We use Luna Park here at Trainual if anybody needs an idea. We are a very competitive bunch, as a bunch of, high performers on this team. And so we have a good time with that as remote teammates. And yeah, sometimes you feel like, I'm going to decline that invite because I'm just too busy and I've got stuff to do. But I try to tell myself, like, it's so important that if you make the short investment of an hour to play some competitive games on Luna Park and collaborate with the team, and to your point, do some trivia and things like that, when I have to work with you again in the future, that collaboration is so much stronger and that communication is better.
Yeah, and you have a funny story to go back and refer to in the touchstone as you get started on that work. So,
it's interesting too is that the COVID, of course, you brought this up. This did a lot to a lot of people, and a lot of these fun events came out of that. Even for us, I think one of the things that was interesting to see is that we've carried that on. We've continued that those activities, those events on, but not only the big ones. We've carried the small ones. You mentioned this a few moments ago, just those little check-ins at the beginning of meetings can be just as valuable for building community as anything else. And that's something that we have absolutely found. So for someone who is feeling like, okay, I should be doing this in my business, it doesn't always have to be the big thing, right? Focus on doing the little things that are just human, that we just enjoy the human interaction thing, and make those an intentional part of the meetings and other things that you're doing together as a team, whether it's face-to-face or remote. That can go a long, long way to building that community that you're talking about a few months ago.
Yeah.
So I want to jump in here and talk about something that's very, very real that I've seen leaders face. That is the pressure to grow. But also the need to stick to your principles. And I'd love to get your advice for leaders who feel like maybe they may be being pulled in opposite directions. I've got to be growing the business, growing all my things, growing the team, growing on this side. But on this side, but I also got to be doing the right thing, right? What is for leaders who feel that pull between the two? What would you say to them? What advice would you give them?
Well, I'd actually start with, a theme that came out in the story that Mallory told to get us started here, which is sort of that thinking about short-term versus long-term. So, leaders should take the long-term view when making decisions. I think it really, if they can keep that in mind, that's a value of ethical deliberation, is actually thinking about the downstream consequences. As I make this decision today, what's likely to unfold in the future. And you can only do that if you're taking the long-term view. If you're just thinking about this quarter or this month even, it's less likely to keep that in mind. But the other thing that people can lean on are the mission and values and principles of the organization. They tend to be some of the most underutilized decision-making tools that are around. So companies write them, they post them, they talk about them. But then when it's actually time to make a decision, they don't necessarily always use them. and they're there for a reason. And so I think one of the ways that people can sort of find the right path in their decision making is to look to those foundational documents, if you will, those underlying declarative statements that have been made about the company, and use them to actually make decisions. And I think when you see leaders who are doing that, it's more likely that they're going to come up with something that's consistent with what is considered doing the right thing in their organization.
Yeah, one of the things we've done here that has been very, very valuable to exactly what you're talking about here is we have our core values. And something that's always been really meaningful for me is that our core values aren't just a poster on the wall. You know what I mean? Like, they are an active part of everything we do. And we give praise to people on our team. We attach that praise to one of our core values. So it's very, very integrated in what we do. That's something I recommend everyone does. If you have core values that are part of your company, make sure they are integrated in everything that you're doing, and even as the praise you're giving. You also mentioned the decision-making, that we have a set of decision-making principles that really help us in terms of guiding every type of decision we're making, and an ethical decision that we're trying to, maybe dilemma that we're running into. So again, making sure those are an integral part of everything you're doing at work is huge. That brings about that, again, that community you're talking about, and the ability to see your way through that, maybe that pull that we were talking about a few moments ago, and make the right decision. So I appreciated that from what you shared there.
Well, that's excellent that you have that in your organization. I mean, that's what a lot of companies really struggle with. And frankly, they come to the Markkula Center and get our help in developing those, which we can do. And it's just fundamental, I think, to helping people consistently make decisions across the organization.
Yeah. What kind of actionable items like actions that someone could take if they're thinking, well, I should do this. How do I start? How would I start? You said you do this at your organization, but how would someone get started on their own, identifying where the issues may be and where they need to maybe address first?
Yeah, so what we typically do with companies is walk them through an exercise where we start with this framework for ethical decision making that we actually have at the Markkula Center. It's on our website. It's free. It's accessible to anybody. It's downloaded millions of times a year, or accessed millions of times a year by people all around the world. And it's taken all the major ethical theologies and approaches and boiled them down into 6 lenses that people can use to think about the decision that's before them. Does it honor and respect the human rights of people? Is it just and fair? Does it serve the greatest good, do the greatest good for the greatest number, a utilitarian approach? Does it support the common good? A virtues approach would look at, does this decision, this option allow me to be the best person I can be? And the last lens is a care lens, sort of, which emphasizes relationships that you have with people and the feelings of others as you're making a decision. So those are 6 sort of big. I just ripped through those. We do all day trainings on those lenses, by the way. So, and case studies and all kinds of things that help people to understand what we're really talking about. But that's them in a very quick little soundbite for you. And then we take those mission and values that organizations have and we turn them into questions, because we have questions that go with each one of those 6 lenses that I just talked about. And we find if the company can add a few customized questions, then that's really how they develop that rubric for ethical decision making in their organization. So they're asking themselves some things that are tied directly to their mission or to their values. And they're using those each time they're making a decision.
It's awesome.
I love that. I personally, you're making me think of something. I have an upbringing that allows me to see the warning signs when it comes to people, I think earlier than most. And I've been in positions where I've mentioned things maybe 6 months ahead of time or even a year ahead of time, and then they don't come to a head until much later. And, I certainly don't want to say, hey, told you so. I knew this was going to happen, saw it coming, right? But I do think that the signs were always there. But I think a lot of times leaders often act surprised when these ethical dilemmas start to creep in, or at least they put on a good show. How can leaders tell if their current practices are actually helping or hurting their company's integrity? And what do you think those early warning signs are, or what those warning systems should be?
So one of the early warning signs for people in leadership positions is whether or not they're being challenged. So if it's very quiet, if everything the leader says is going unchecked by anybody on the team, that's not necessarily a good sign. That means that people aren't feeling like they can speak up. And the chances that things are getting missed or not identified by people on the team that would cause problems down the road is just that much greater. So you really want a climate of mutual trust and understanding where people feel like they can bring issues forward and they could say to the boss, here's the problem with that decision, or here's the challenges that I see down the road. And along with that, you hope to see that decisions are decentralized in the organization. If every decision has to be run through the corner office, that's also a flag. That tells you that people aren't confident that they have the tools that they need to make decisions, or they're too afraid of repercussions if they make a mistake. And you don't want that to be happening either. And then at a systemic level, one of the things we look for is we look at those corporate values. And there's a couple of flag words that we see in values that tell us, potentially there's a culture here that's going to, lead people astray or make it more likely for them to have a misstep. So when we see a value that has, win at all costs, or, any kind of zero-sum language that's really not allowing for the gray areas to be considered in decisions, we usually try and work with companies to rephrase those values and think about what it is they're really trying to get at with the expression of that quality in their organization.
I love that. A deep dive of the core values and figuring out, what does this language mean for the results we're going to get out of it and the behaviors ultimately that we're going to breed from it.
Right. And then, of course, there's those regular pulse taking surveys that we talked about, that sort of constant checking in with people and asking the question. The pulse surveys tend to be, take one topic area and go deep on them sort of in a really frequent way. But there are surveys that can be done, or assessments that can be done maybe less frequently, but dive even deeper into the actual ethical culture of the company, where you're asking people, have you seen somebody make a misstep in your organization? Do you feel like you could draw that to someone's attention? Is there a free flow of information amongst different parts of the organization? Do the senior management team walk the walk and in terms of their actions and behaviors? There are questions that you can ask that kind of get to that. And again, if you're asking those regularly, they can surface issues too. So they can serve as a kind of warning system as well.
I love the intentionality there, and the fact that those questions are not generic by any stretch and are going to get you actual results that you can take action against.
Yeah.
It occurs to me, and you brought up the core values again, it occurs to me that there may be quite a few folks that already have the groundwork in the core values that they've established for their companies, but maybe haven't gone the length of what we've just been discussing here. And it's just something, an insight of like, hey, if you've got your core values that are just a poster on the wall, there's a great place to start from. There's a great foundation to work from and dig into each one of those and how those are integrated and how they drive, again, the decision-making and the culture of what you are establishing within your organization. You've already got the groundwork there. It's a great place to start.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Well, we've already been digging into this a little bit. I'd love to continue the theme of these specific examples of how leaders can drive the right type of behavior, especially in a fast-paced, results-driven, high-performing team. So I'm talking about the actionable steps. Something that I love this. What can someone leave this recording, this podcast, and do today that will start making changes in their organization there?
Sure. Well, they can adopt what I refer to as the practice of ethical leadership. And I use the word practice intentionally because I think of it like a yoga practice, like, holding poses and deepening muscle, use. And really, I find that's more effective than talking about good leaders and bad leaders or ethical leaders and unethical leaders. It's really instead encouraging these certain practices in all of us. So the foundation of this model or this practice is a balance between being and doing. So the first part of the model that everything is built on is the character of the leader, how they show up in the world, how consistent they are, how much people feel they have basic integrity around the values they espouse and the actions they take. And everything else that I'm going to talk about, all the other actions are built on that foundation. And so to have the greatest impact, that needs to be in place. But then in addition to that sort of being element, the doing is a set of activities that help people to bring ethics forward in the organization. We've already talked about one of them, which is building community and, investing in that activity as a real practical way of encouraging ethical behavior. Because again, people who have those relationships with each other feel some obligation to one another. They don't want to let each other down. The second activity is what I call just sort of encouraging ethical conduct. And so this is kind of the basic blocking and tackling of ethics in a lot of organizations. It looks like a code of conduct or some kind of pledge that everybody signs annually, where you're actually having people pause and think about what are the commitments that we're making to the way that we behave in this organization. But it can also be more subtle things, like thinking about the blind spots that we all have that cause us to behave unethically. People are more likely to make ethical mistakes when they are tired or hungry. So, just meeting the basic needs of your workforce can go a long way towards ensuring ethical behavior. Or there's something called ethical fading, which is when people take a decision that is really an ethical decision, but they recast it as a business decision and they put numbers around it, and they really lose actually the ethical issues that are in the decision that they're trying to make. So leaders can kind of reframe decisions so that people can see, here's the ethical issue in this discussion that we're having right now and this decision that we have to make. So the second activity is encouraging ethical conduct. The third activity is sort of the heart of the model, which is, I refer to it as playing your position, which is a sports analogy. And I know people get tired of sports analogies, but it really works in this situation. It's about being relentless about the interests that you are charged with representing. So if you are on the management team of a company, that's the mission and the business objectives of that company. If you're a parent, that's the interests of your children. If you're a coach, it's looking at the interests of your team. If you're a public office holder, you take an oath usually, and in that oath, it tells you what you're committing to in that role. So people who come back a time and time again, and I've already hammered on this already, but to mission, vision, values, to the things that they are responsible for, and use that as a decision-making guide, are taking an action that is more likely to bring out the best in the people in the organization. The next activity is how people respond when things go wrong, because things are going to go wrong, right? I mean, life is not perfect, and organizations, have zigs and zags in their story all the time. And so it's how the leader responds to that. Do they pause and take some time to reset, to clarify the culture, to make distinctions between, okay, this happened and this is not okay, and here's why it's not okay, and here's what we're going to do about it. So really that, again, that intentionality, as Mallory pointed out, around the response to mistakes or to crises in the organization. And the last one's maybe a little bit harder for people to understand, and not everybody has the capacity to do this last action. You have to really be locked in your role, but it's sort of stepping beyond your role to look at the design of the system that you're working in. That could be the ecosystem or the industry that you're part of, and trying to actually set some standards in that industry or that business association that you might be part of that drives ethical behavior. So a good recent example of this was last summer, a number of technology companies got together and came to the White House and invested some time in articulating sort of approaches to implementing artificial intelligence that were going to, meet certain guidelines in terms of research, data use, watermarking, and identifying artificially AI generated content. So that's sort of an example of there's CEOs going kind of above and beyond their responsibilities to just their organization, but saying, hey, as an industry, we need to establish some norms that drive behavior industry-wide. So I call that designing the system. And there are certain aspects of it that are internal to companies, the way you set compensation systems and other reward systems that motivate behavior. Those are examples of it, maybe that are closer to home. So those, so there's the being part, sort of the character of the leader and the way they behave. Then there's building community, encouraging ethical conduct, playing your position, clarifying culture, designing the system. Those taken together can really go a long way towards guiding people in your organization to behave ethically.
I want to come back for a second to something that you said that I found so interesting. So you said there's character, which is the being. And then on the other side of that, there's the doing. And we've talked a lot about the doing, the things you can do, the frameworks, all of those things. But coming back to the character and the being, a lot of times when we look at that, we say, oh, you have to hire the right person that fits your core values, so on and so forth. But I've been part of a lot of acquisitions or have switched roles and acquired team members. Like there are a lot of situations where maybe you can't just hire all the right people. Do you feel like people's behaviors can be changed? Can they be coached into these ethical practices?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we believe in and do at the Markkula Center is character education. We've invested resources in developing tools that teachers can use in K through 12 education, so at the earliest years. But you can provide character education at any point in life. I mean, when a company brings us in to train their workforce on the framework for ethical decision-making, those 6 lenses that I talked about, that's what they're doing. They're just investing in helping people to think through and reason ethically and to slow down and make those choices. So I do think you can do it. And I think mentorship is another example of how we do that in organizations. You have a mentor, somebody that you look up to, you're watching. How is that person's character coming forward in the decisions that they're making? How is their mastery of themselves? How do they manage their own emotions and maybe their reactions to other people in the workplace? All those are things that you learn from and model off of other people. And so that's why we have mentorship programs in organizations, because we're trying to guide people as to what we think is good and right behavior in our company. But the way I paint the picture that I just described of that model is I use kind of a cylinder and I show each one of those as a layer. And the reason I do that is, the bottom layer is this character piece. And if you pull it out, everything else sinks down. In other words, you can't have the impact that you want to have as a leader if you don't have that piece in place as well. And that being is really a lot of the self-care things that we've come to talk about. Again, COVID really helped bring this forward. But, it's a responsibility of the leader to take care of themselves, to be well rested, to get the exercise they need, to develop themselves professionally in their own personal development, things that other people are going to be watching to see, is this person setting themselves up for success and able to guide us effectively because of those practices.
Yeah. Okay. So thinking about this, a couple of things came to mind. One of them, we talked about roles or positions. We talked about our sports analogies here, but we're big on those as well. I'm thinking about what would the power be of when you are hiring for a role or someone is coming into that role, I mean, obviously a big part of that is giving them what their job is and what the responsibilities are going to be. But I was really fascinated by this concept of the oath that you mentioned a few moments ago, of taking an oath, of office, right? When you come into a role, whether that is the oath of office or if it's just simply the commitments or, whatever else that are part of that role, that these are the decision-making principles I align with or that I will uphold. These are the things that I will do, and make it kind of an oath, kind of this commitment that when you come into that role, that is the thing you're going to be living to within that role. Not just the job responsibilities. How powerful would that be if that was a part of your onboarding, whether it's in a brand new role or, different position within the company, leadership position, what have you? How powerful would that be?
Yeah. Well, that's really a great example of systems design, right? When you think about the professions that do have oaths, doctors, CPAs, attorneys, people who take and are held to a standard that is set profession-wide, even overriding any individual firm or company that they work for or healthcare institution or anything like that, they're really pledging to a set of standards that they're going to follow in anything that they do. And that is very powerful. There's been a lot of discussion. You mentioned that I went to business school, and in business schools across the country, there's a lot of discussion about should we be developing some kind of oath that people who graduate with business degrees take to certain ethical practices in business. And it's a challenge because there's so many different industries and businesses to come up with a single oath like that. But it certainly is something that people see the value in and try and recreate in different ways.
Yeah, love that.
I want to praise you for a second for bringing up the importance of self-care and mentorship in what we're talking about, because I think when we have these conversations, it can be so heavily focused on just the business practices and how things are structured. And I think the core of who we are, how we carry ourselves in our personal lives, the things that we feed our minds, all of that is so important. And I think people with mentors, it's very evident, I guess I would say, that people who have mentors and how they work, how they show up, how they communicate. And I think everybody who is a leader it should be required that they have a mentor. How can leaders walk the walk and really build that mindset, whether it's through a mentor or anything else, and ensuring that they have that integrity first, ethics first mindset when they're leading, and maybe something that they should ask themselves before they make any decision or communicate anything to their team? Like, what should constantly be in somebody's mindset?
So you might be bored with this answer because I've given it before, but it is that, the whole idea of, are their actions consistent with the mission and values of the company? So again, that is just the North Star in organizations, or should be. And if someone finds themselves in an organization that does have sort of what I call paper values, just the ones that are hanging on the wall but haven't really been brought to life, that doesn't mean they can't create them in their own work team or their own division. These are the practices we're going to commit to. We're going to chart our own sort of work team values or best practices or commitments or promises. There's lots of different ways that I've seen groups do this effectively. So they can create that in their own smaller part of the organization if they need to. But they also can ask, what learning will be embodied by their action? Once they do something, what are other people going to learn from it and do in their organization as a result of that? So it's putting themselves in the role of being the mentor, saying, okay, I have this obligation to teach other people what's good behavior in our company. An advisor to me, a mentor of mine who sits on an ethics council that we have at the Markkula Center, always reminds the rest of us that leaders in organizations are responsible for other people's careers. If you lead your division or your organization to a significant misstep or something that sort of smears the whole company in the public eye, you're really harming the future resume value of everyone that comes from that company. then you have that blight, that thing that you need to explain. Oh yeah, I was working at that company at that time that happened. And here's either what I learned from it or this was my role in it. That's a decent responsibility. But the other thing I would say, and that leaders have an obligation to do, back to that sort of self-care, is to learn about blind spots, to learn about how it is that any one of us can, make mistakes, because we're all have the capacity for ethical missteps. No one is perfect. And at different points in our lives, we will make ethical missteps. So to try and understand a little bit better about what causes that. And there's actually a book, it's called Blind Spots. It was written by Ann Brunzel and Max Bazerman. Ann's at Notre Dame and Max Bazerman's at Harvard. And it just talks about just 4 different distinct blind spots that people should be aware of and can overcome in their approach to decision making and in their work that they do.
Yeah. So let's dig into this a little bit. We've talked about a lot of the frameworks here to help with these decision makings and tough calls. But where do you think that some of the trickiest waters are? Like, where are the places that are like the most volatile areas, the gray areas that people will typically run into that you've seen, and how do we navigate through those?
Yeah, so I think right now, one of the trickiest areas is in human resources. I think there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, I think it's always been the case that this is tricky in the sense of, there's these issues of, do you keep the star player on your team who gets results, even if you become aware that they use bullying behavior or demean other people in the workplace? That's a kind of a classic, if you will. But I think the other reason that human resources is going to provide the greatest challenge moving forward is because of the impact of technology. As we're bringing new technologies on that are fundamentally changing the ways that people work, we have to revisit our commitments to the workforce. And we have to really think about the workforce well-being in a workplace that's going to be integrated with AI, for example, and how that's changing people's sense of meaning and purpose, and how we keep that alive in work for them. So I think that in the past, we've seen a very traditional path to the top of a corporate ladder would be, you have to have experience in sales, or the revenue generating part of the organization. I think in the future, we might see more people find their way to the corner office by having experience in people management and human resources and having been effective in that role. And I just will say that the development of responsible technology is another tricky area. How companies are actually bringing that technology online, how they're setting principles, how they're thinking about the potential harms of those technologies, I think is a big issue in society right now. Would we all feel as great about social media if we had understood at the beginning the impact it was going to have on young people and their mental health, for example? So, we're identifying a lot of ethical concerns in AI, the bias in the systems, the fact that it's using copyrighted material, the negative impact it's having on the environment, and yet we're forging ahead with it. And so how companies are doing that and thinking about that, I think, is really important too. And I think that the environment is actually a place in the business world where there are only gray areas. All these companies are making these commitments to, zero carbon footprint and reaching certain goals by certain milestone years. And yet, so talk about balancing the short term and the long term, right? They're under pressure to hit certain metrics in the short term and that the market is going to reward. But they also know that climate change is real, and our long-term survivability depends on taking that longer time horizon and making those decisions. So I think that's another area that's particularly challenging for business leaders right now.
Yeah. Okay. So you brought up AI, several things there, but I want to talk about AI because that's very much on our minds. We're all in AI here at Trainwheel. We use a lot of AI. And obviously, a lot of folks are finding uses for that. And I love your point about, would we approach, social media the same way today, knowing what we know about what it's done? And what are those types of questions we can be thinking about in terms of AI? So how do leadership responsibilities look like they're going to be changing in the next few years as AI becomes a lot more integrated into our day-to-day work? Any quick ethical guidelines specific to AI that you like to share with our listeners here?
Yeah, sure. Leaders should develop principles that their organization are going to use to guide their technology development. They should identify a leader of responsible technology development in the company and put together cross-divisional teams to really grapple with the issues that it brings up. They should develop frameworks for their governing of their technology, how they're going to actually, check in on it every year, what metrics they're going to report, and again, those principles that are going to guide it. And then they really need to bake that framework into their everyday processes and measure their results after they've done that. And that's very quickly sort of 5 stages that we walk companies through in a book that I co-authored called Ethics in the Age of Disruptive Technologies, an Operational Roadmap. And you can download that book for free from the Markkula Center site, because our goal is just to get the resources out to as many people as possible. And if you want a hard copy, you can buy it on Amazon. But it was really in response to this question that you just asked, Shawn, that companies that we work with kept saying, you guys need to write this all down. We need kind of a how-to manual for doing this. And it draws on research that we've done both at the Markkula Center and then in collaboration with other organizations like the World Economic Forum and the Partnership on Artificial Intelligence to really sort of boil down what are the best practices that we've seen in companies across the globe.
Speaking of those processes and playbooks, if you will, that's what we're all about here at Trainual. And to your point, it does help us create structure around right and wrong, but we're also super big fans of innovation. And one of our core values is making ideas happen. And that stems from healthy curiosity and experimentation. So my question for you is, how can leaders encourage a culture of curiosity without leading into those ethical gray areas?
Yeah, I think, we've talked about the influence that stories have and the stories that people tell. So I think a few well-told tales about how people explored and created something new, but also something that was ethically sound, go a long way towards signaling other people in the organization that ethics matter, first of all, that's one of the ways that you're evaluating the success of new innovations inside of your company. And it's also why value statements and principles and mission statements are so valuable as decision-making tools. And it also highlights the importance of those cross-divisional teams. Because when you're trying to innovate, if you bring in people from different parts of the company, then you have different perspectives. People are going to spot different things based on where they sit in the organization. And they're going to be able to say, okay, well, we were probably brought together. We bring together a cross-divisional team often to generate new ideas or to create a product or identify additional revenue streams, maybe that your company hasn't tapped yet, whatever the activity might be. And we know that it's easier to spot ethical issues when you're working in teams, when you're talking through issues with people. It's one of the things in the framework for ethical decision making that we emphasize, is sort of talking it over with other people. So you really want to stand up those cross-divisional representational teams that really will bring those different perspectives to the work that you're trying to do, the innovation that you're trying to foster in the organization.
I love that. Oh, and this has been awesome. I want to end us off on a bit of a lighter note here. I mean, you've worked you shared this in so many different places with so many different people. I would love to hear an unexpected lesson that you learned about leadership that you picked up along the way here as you worked with the people and doing all these things you've done over these years.
Yeah, I guess I would say that I've learned that leaders should be honest about their concerns that people will behave unethically. I actually was in a conversation with a group of leaders through an organization I used to run here in Silicon Valley. the American Leadership Forum, which is a CEO population. And they were sitting around we happened to be on a camping trip, and they were sitting around a campfire talking about, at the time it was Sarbanes-Oxley, which was new legislation that came online in the early 2000s. And it really shifted the responsibility to the CEO for the behavior that everybody had in their organization. And these CEOs were so honest with me about, oh my gosh, like we're on the hook for everything people in our organization, do. I mean, that's, an incredible responsibility. And how do we do that? And all the research and all these frameworks that I've shared with you, research we did to identify conditions that when they exist in companies make it more likely for ethics to get used. All that work has been trying to answer that question. But what I've seen is that when leaders share that with people that they work with, that's very powerful, because it says to people, oh, they care about this and they're worried about it. This is top of mind. And they start to share that concern and that commitment to doing things responsibly, with the leader. So I think it's just another way of demonstrating vulnerability, if you will, but, signaling to people that ethical decision-making is a quality that you value as a leader.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ann. Tell folks where they can follow you and connect with you.
Well, the easiest place to find us is at the Markkula Center website, which is www.scu.edu/ethics, but a quick Google will get you there as well. And I'm on LinkedIn, of course, and on Twitter at Leader Ethics.
Awesome. And also be sure to click the link in our show notes for a made-for-you process template that highlights all the best practices Ann highlighted today, as well as we'll link some of her goodies from her website as well. As always, document your processes and be a good human. We'll catch you next time.